welcome to the second BioProcess Insider State of the Industry discussion. Over the next half hour or so, we hope to dig into some of the recent news and trends in the biomanufacturing sector affecting this current quarter and beyond. I'm the editor of BioProcess Insider and the host of this webcast, Dan Stanton, and I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts. We have John Harmer, the head of sales and marketing for Cytiva's Aseptic filling Workcells business. We have James Taylor, the co-founder and general manager at Precision Nanosystems Inc. And we have Georgia Sloboda, managing director of CMC at life sciences consultancy firm Latham Biopharm Group. Welcome. So we're going to look at several topics and trends that stood out in the past quarter. We are going to talk about M&A activity in both the bioprocess and CDMO space, and if time permits us, sustainability in our industry. And perhaps we'll throw in some predictions for the coming year along the way. But we're going to begin where we kind of have to begin, and that is, of course, with COVID-19, and more specifically on the evolving state of biopharma supply chains. Georgia, our last State of the Industry discussion took a deep look into this, with the pandemic blamed for stretching entire supply chains across the industry. Several months on, are you and your clients seeing any alleviation of the situation?
Well, we unfortunately are not. The alleviation from a supply perspective has really driven our clients and our suppliers to look at different options to compensate for the extended time in which routine materials were typically manufactured and delivered for supply. So while we do not really see an ease in availability of materials for many of our clients, what we do see is really a shift to alternative solutions to address the supply constraints. So again, we're seeing an environment that requires us to be a bit more agile, a bit more nimble, and think outside the box in order to compensate for the constraint in supply today.
And let me jump in and just say, to be the pessimist here, we also see this. I mean, in our part of the industry, we're not in the bioprocessing side, we're in the aseptic filling side, but we do depend on pre-sterilized, not only filling flow paths, but also primary containers, as well as obviously our customers need sterilizing filters for the aseptic filling operation. Those have been in very short supply. It is an ongoing issue. The pandemic has made it worse, but I suspect it's a structural issue. The use of pre-sterilized or single-use components has been expanding exponentially within the industry, as well as in new modalities. And that's where the crunch is really coming. So 10 years ago, single-use wasn't used in aseptic filling. And I know in LNP encapsulation, it wasn't used to the same extent. But with all these new modalities and the fact that behind the high-scale requirements of the pandemic, there's an explosion of small scale and personalized therapies, it again means that demand is going up exponentially, but capacity is expanding on a linear basis. And so the problem is that especially on the raw material side, that what goes into the single-use components, they don't have the same visibility as to how quickly it's expanding. So it's going to need a very concerted effort of expanding manufacturing capacity, automating that manufacturing capacity, and trying to stay well ahead of it, because when the pandemic is over, we'll still have a structural problem that we need to solve.
And James, I suppose if you've got any views to share there on how you're seeing the supply chain affected because of COVID and beyond, then now's the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say regarding where we play and our clients, we're involved in RNA medicines and therapeutics. So clearly that's been a big part of the vaccine development for COVID. And so with that, extreme demands on the supply chain in technologies that would be also used in, say, rare diseases or oncology. And so the development programs certainly there's supply chain challenges with getting RNA components within nanoparticles and the like. And so it's really affecting more than just, say, the vaccine space, but in other adjacent spaces as well.
So it's really across the whole industry. Georgia, I want to pick you up on something you said there regarding biomanufacturers looking at alternatives because the supply just isn't there. When we're working in such a highly regulated industry, what do you mean by alternatives? Where are customers sourcing consumables and equipment if they can't go to their usual sort of sources?
Well, that's exactly the point. They're not going to their usual sources. So if you're a single source or secondary source based business, you're really looking at equivalent alternatives from perhaps suppliers that you've never utilized before. So again, that's where the opportunities are coming. Although, again, I fully agree with John and James in terms of structural problem and really a long-term challenge for the industry. However, again, where most companies have not really had the opportunity or the need to do it, now again, they're more apt to look down that avenues that they have never considered before, right? So again, that was my point.
And what we're seeing is smaller companies that aren't involved in a pandemic response. They still have to advance their drugs in their pipeline. People still get other diseases and need to be cured. And so what we're looking at is making sure that they have a robust supply strategy, that they are qualifying more than one filter from more than one source for their sterilizing filter. That's the critical part. The other thing we're really driving towards is standardizing our single-use offerings. Because one of the issues is the more diverse you make your offering, the more likely it is to have that one component that holds everything up. So people are realizing that they can make some concessions in the uniqueness of their design, because when it comes down to it, aseptic, the same thing for everyone. You're putting liquid in a container. You just have to do it perfectly. So we standardize. And so if they can do that approach, we can supply better if we're supplying a standard product, and allows us to really concentrate on just delivering that aspect of the supply chain. If you keep it simple, it's going to be easier to maintain. It also means that the suppliers have a consistent view of what they need to supply, because you're giving them accurate projections.
So looking at maybe a silver lining from the COVID pandemic, obviously it's the demand is so high that suppliers are doing rather well. But James, from with your company and your lipid nanoparticle tech platform, has the advent of mRNA due to COVID-19 and the success story of the vaccines helped move your company into a position that may have been deemed unthinkable in 2019?
That's a great question. What I would say, so for us, we always thought it was thinkable, and we're extremely bullish on the space of RNA medicines. And I think, importantly, what we've seen throughout the pandemic is a continued progress and validation of what we call the genomic medicine toolbox. So you have mRNA that can be used for protein replacement, or also to express antigens to create a vaccine and teach the immune system, or gene editing technologies, or technologies that can silence genes. And all of these modalities have really progressed at the same time, and you could see it coming through the years leading up to it. What the pandemic did, and the result of the RNA vaccines really going from being not a technology that was yet proven to being the leading technology, has really shone the light on how disruptive genomic medicines are, and really as we switch from a really frankly an analog to a digital type therapeutic approaches, just how quickly things can change. So with that, I would say the larger stakeholder universe has really has had the light shine on this field in a very positive way. based on what the capabilities are. Now, I think as we progress further to the future, further clinical validation of different modalities and different indications and really expanding out what's possible will continue that momentum and will need to happen to really be, drive this exponential growth in the field.
Going back to the supply chain, we have spoken before, and it's been well documented that vendors like Cytiva and others have expedited capital expenditure projects to really help feed that huge demand. It sounds like from what John and Georgia, you were saying earlier, that these projects haven't quite come online yet. But is there any sort of, maybe if we look at perhaps what the first prediction for 2022, are we expecting this capacity across the board to come online and maybe alleviate these bottlenecks, or is demand so high that it's not really going to make a dent?
It will be coming online. It already has started to come online, but it's going to need to be continued capacity expansion to meet the ongoing need. So it needs commitment from not just Cytiva, but all the suppliers of single-use components to really increase the need. And it'll again require coordination with the producers of the raw materials, because they might not have the same visibility of how much the pharmaceutical demand is really driving or increasing the proportion of their business. The other thing that is going to become increasingly obvious is that sterilization is a bottleneck. Sterilization services aren't just used by pharmaceuticals, and there's limited sterilization capacity. So one of the other things that the whole industry is doing is looking at alternatives for sterilization, including X-ray. And that's something that's getting advanced and getting a lot of activity right off the bat.
And is that something where that maybe COVID has stoked, and we're going to see a lot more of next year and a lot more problems coming about?
I hope that we can manage it. We can manage the capacity expansion, but to say that it's going to go away as soon as everyone's vaccinated and the demand drops down, it's going to be an ongoing issue that's going to need active involvement and a fair bit of expansion.
Okay, Georgia, do you see any specific areas within the biomanufacturing space where we may be seeing new bottlenecks emerging next year, or is it just going to be continued stress upon the supply chains as we've seen, well, this year and last now?
Well, I don't think the stress upon the supply chain really, again, will alleviate, just due to the compounded effect of COVID and demand and supply, increased supply. However, I do think that manufacturers are looking at value propositions when it comes to expansion, what makes sense for future state therapies, and really has them thinking in terms of greenfield opportunities, brownfield opportunities, as well as the technologies that they're going to need to pursue in order to meet client demands. So again, we are growing technically exponentially in the next 5 to 10 years because of COVID and because of the new therapies that are coming out there. And the other impact of that is existing, I would say, legacy capabilities, single use, filling suites that are that require quite a bit of resources and maintained the infrastructure to the levels that it doesn't become beneficial for companies to maintain. That is going to be another sort of outcome of this realization of where technology needs to go to and the facilities needed to meet those technical demands in the future. So again, it's the future is it's changing. Our footprint is changing in terms of what we're going to be focusing on.
And we definitely see with that. I mean, one of the biggest trends we're seeing is, traditionally there's been a real split between drug substance manufacturing, especially on the biological side, and aseptic filling, with them happening at different sites. But with our technology, which is focused on isolation, on robotics and automation, co-location now becomes a very real possibility. And that simplifies the supply chain. You're no longer shipping frozen bulk from one place to the other, and you're able to have a much more efficient production. And what the other thing we're seeing is that with advanced therapies, there is going to be much more emphasis on controlling the manufacturing process. The FDA is saying that with personalized medicines, they're going to be spending about 80% of their time on CMC as opposed to clinical results, because that's how you're going to establish your safety and efficacy, is control of your manufacturing process. So that drives, developers of innovative drugs to really understand their manufacturing process, probably rely on a platform technology like LNP that allows them to move quickly and bring candidates to the market quickly. But they're really going to have to understand their manufacturing process, which means they're likely going to have to move their validation back earlier in their clinical program and have greater control of the process. And that's where it aligns with what we've designed for aseptic filling.
It feels very much.
No,
James.
I would just say that what we're seeing too in the field is an increased interest of CDMOs to adopt manufacturing platforms to serve clients in the RNA medicine space in particular. Whereas, a couple of years ago, and to your question regarding the impact of COVID, a couple of years ago, it was really just a few niche players, but we're seeing an expansion of those groups. Hopefully can also help to build extra capacity for the drug developers in the field.
It sounds very much that these sort of technology innovations are really going to help unblock some of these bottlenecks and help move us to the next stage of drug making, possibly something that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago. John, you talk about robotics, you talk about AI, James, you talk about platform technologies, which didn't seem to be a thing a decade ago. So to sort of finish this segment on the supply chain, how, in a couple of words, how important is technology in the drug making field at the moment?
Yeah, maybe I can start. I think it's a unique opportunity right now, particularly with these new modalities. Again, I'll go back to RNA medicines. The vast majority of the manufacturing process is cell-free, and unlike biologics, unlike viral-based gene therapies, unlike cell therapies, we're not using big tanks. We're using continuous flow processes. So it's a dawn of a new era, and what can be done from a manufacturing standpoint allows us to do really unique and interesting things like distributed manufacturing, localized manufacturing, being able to set up factories and replicate them in much easier ways, smaller footprints. I think we're just starting to see the impact of these other benefits of these drugs, and it'll be a really interesting time from a bioprocessing perspective.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next subject that I'd like us to speak about, and that's M&A activity within the bioprocess space. Now, as a business journalist in this niche, I've observed and interviewed my way across hundreds of acquisitions over the past decades. It's just really molded the industry into one that's kind of dominated by a handful of companies now. James and John, you're both part of the Cytiva family, which is part of the Danaher Corporation. Although, you're, the way that you became part of that corporation, they're very different types of acquisitions. We will get to that. But first, I'd like to ask you, Georgia, that generally speaking, is bioprocessing consolidation a positive or a negative thing for the wider biopharma industry when you think about the handful of players at the top and the pool of niche small players out there that are being snapped up?
I think it depends, right? So again, we see the opportunity for a lot of these small, innovative or bioprocessing developers. They're nimble, they're agile, they're quick with their development, and really, it's very attractive for someone that's larger and doesn't have the ability to flex as much. So I think in a lot of ways it is a positive, where now you can, the ability for a smaller organization to merge with somebody who has the infrastructure, the organization, and all the elements to take the development and expand that is really a plus for, again, maturing therapies and getting more product to market.
And John and James, as both sort of representatives of companies who have been bought by a very large player, what does having Danaher as a parent bring to your divisions, to your companies, and ultimately to your customers?
It's structure and resources. I mean, Danaher's a great organization. Their results speak for themselves. It allows us to address new markets. We are now tied into a global sales and service organization that expands our reach, and also, allows us to continue to innovate. We can again, because some of the logistical aspects of business are being taken care of, we can concentrate on bringing new products to market as well. We're definitely not stopping. We're going to continue to innovate in the field. So that's really good. The other thing, of course, is it allows us to work with a company that was just down the street from us, that we know we have a large number of common interests. We've got great synergies, but we never, as independent organizations, kind of had the time or the opportunity to really work together as closely as we now can. So, I mean, that's something I'm very excited about doing in the future with James, obviously.
And James, as a new part of this Danaher family, what are these synergies that you now looking to unlock with John and his team?
Yeah, fantastic question. And I would say, the big impetus for us choosing to work with Danaher in this way is the ability for us to create solutions that are bigger than ourselves, our individual company. And so if you look across the Cytiva, Paul, Vanarex, Precision Nanosystems, and there's other key companies in the Danaher groups in drug substance and analytics, we really have all of the key components to develop end-to-end lines, manufacturing lines for this very new area of therapeutics, and a long history of succeeding in other advanced therapeutics like cell therapies and the like. And so there's just a tremendous opportunity for us to create, very deep solutions that are game changing for the industry, and really unlock the potential of genomic medicines, and let the drug developers, focus on what they're good at innovating, and work with us to really help to de-risk and accelerate their programs to and through the clinic.
As smaller bioprocess tech firms, is being part of a larger corporation the only real way to grow these days?
I think there's lots of ways to grow these days. Capital is not the consideration as much as it used to be. I think getting capital is easier than it has been. Again, for us, it was around those complete solutions. But I think there's various ways, and you can see innovative tools and technology platform companies that are going on the public markets and staying independent or what have you. But I think in the context of the field that we're in, this is just a tremendous opportunity for all of us.
Georgia, a vendor recently described the M&A environment as lively. I'm wondering if you've got any insights there into how competitive it is in the bioprocess tech M&A space right now, and whether that's perhaps overinflating the price of entities. Obviously not the people that are on our panel here, but generally.
I think lively is a great adjective, right? Because just keeping your eye on the pulse of again, innovative, smaller organizations, and to James's point, their capital investments and the reach that they can have in such a short period of time. It's really looking at what the best fit is out there from an organizational and structural point. What is the best marriage of the two companies, innovation and infrastructure? So I think that there's a lot that's going to happen in 2022, 2023 with these, again, fast growing innovative companies that we see today. And we should expect a lot of activity in the environment in the next coming year or two. It's really an exciting time.
You've preempted my question about the predictions for the next year or two. That's absolutely fine. But again, John, James, if you do have any idea of whether this M&A activity will continue to be so robust going forward, and if so, what sort of areas and functions bioprocess vendors will be likely to look at when they're considering their war chests. That would be a great bit of insight going forward.
Well, I'm not sure I can comment on what Cytiva is looking to acquire, but in terms of the industry that we deal with, the aseptic filling industry, we are seeing acquisitions and mergers within the contract organizations. And we see that as a way of addressing what we is a shortage in capacity. We see continued expansion and more greenfield facilities in the US as people are bringing supply and capabilities back to North America. But again, I'm not going to identify targets that.
No, I wouldn't expect you to. Not here anyway. We can talk offline. But no. So I mean, that's really interesting though that it addresses our first part where we're talking about the shortage. So there's kind of a push and a race to fill those gaps through acquisitions. You also mentioned there the desire to bring back manufacturing to an extent in North America. That sort of regional manufacturing push. How and James or Georgia, if you want to jump in here, how much pressure is the industry under to make manufacturing more local, and what's really driving that?
Yeah, I think if I can start, I think regarding local manufacturing, the pressures are potentially in the industry, but also within sovereign nations. So there's a big impetus and big push from various governments around the world to incentivize or to directly invest in manufacturing capabilities to solve supply chains, particularly around pandemic preparedness. And also, I think now with these new technologies, people are seeing the ability for local manufacturing and the advantages of distributed manufacturing in certain cases, and being able to do that in a cost-effective way. So I think that is going to be a really new addition to the toolbox of how these drugs are made and distributed, which will be really fascinating over the next 5 years.
Yes, and may I add a result of that, and I 100% agree with the comment, the result of that is also regulatory strategy, right? So your regulatory strategy expands and shifts based upon your supply chain strategy as well, where to manufacture. And we have clients that are continually discussing the strategy in terms of in-country manufacturing, secondary manufacturing capabilities, overseas. So again, what the future is going to hold in that regard is really a regulatory strategy that is again all-encompassing and can actually flex between the requirements for different markets, right?
And is mentioning COVID again, I do apologize, but it does feel that the early days of COVID, when every government was desperately scrabbling around to get PPE and other such, really helped stress the importance of in-country production. Has that died down at all in the past 18 months, or is that still the thought process at the back of every government's mind that they want to have ample supply if ever such a horrible situation happens again?
I think it's still there. I maybe it's not as urgent or in the press every day, or in the House of Commons or what have you in Canada. But I would say the We're seeing that. We're also seeing the drug companies set up manufacturing in other countries that do not currently have access to vaccines, for example. And I think that's a very good, very positive thing that's happening, and figuring out how to do all this well. But I think it'll persist. I think has seen, the change in supply chains in our industry and outside of our industry, and the fragility of them, and we'll want to make them more robust and more resilient.
Okay, well, let's bring the conversation back to M&A, but let's talk about M&A in the CDMO space. So a recent report found that for the first 6 months of 2021, there were 32 CDMO acquisitions. Now, the deals were quite broad in their definition, but included facility buys, CDMO asset buys, and I think what is still the largest deal of the year, Thermo Fisher's acquisition of the CRO PPD. So it's very broad in its terminology. But almost half the deals were led by private equity or private equity backed companies. And again, it's a very, very robust environment and a lot of money going around. Georgia, is that at all surprising, or is it really just more of the same reflection of what a strong and opportunity, what a large opportunity the pharma industry is for outside investors?
Yeah, I think it's a result of the opportunity, right? So it is manifested from, number one, supply chain constraints, the need to increase capacity, the need to really hone in on where the synergies are from a manufacturing capability perspective and footprint all over the globe. So again, it's not surprising. It's also a way to meet the increasing demand in a one-stop shop, because as we talked about earlier, when our clients are looking for excess capacity, they really want to be able to not only have their formulation and filling, development, analytical capabilities in one location, but they also want to continue to work with maybe one contracting firm, and they also want to be able to have a global footprint. So in this way, some of these mergers really satisfy the needs of these organizations when they're looking to solve multiple solutions for their supply chain constraints.
So really, customers are looking for that one-stop shop solution from their CDMO.
We find that with a lot of our clients. They, again, do not want to multi-source the development through commercialization of their product. They want to be able to build that relationship with a quality CDMO that can provide them support from development all the way to commercialization.
And the other thing we're seeing is customers that want distributed solutions with standardized equipment and processes. They can actually reduce their tech transfer time. If they can transfer a product from a aseptic filling facility in China to the exact same facility or solution in Europe, it shortens their time. And so that's one of the benefits of the standardization that we're working on. The ability to reasonably manage a distributed network where now every site has identical infrastructure. Well, previously you had very, very different infrastructures in different sites. And it again does support a common regulatory approach where you make sure that the equipment can meet the needs of every jurisdiction and have common filings if possible.
So that globalized approach is really also triggering this CDMO M&A, right?
Oh yes.
James, how do the shifting dynamics in the CDMO space affect you as a sort of a customer a company that supplies contract manufacturers with such innovative tech? Is that changing the way you're working with customers, or is it shrinking the pool of potential customers even?
No, I think there's a couple things, right? And it gets to the M&A question of why these things are happening, but I think it gets down to capacity and capabilities, right? So so I think there's an explosion of new companies, new innovative drug developers in the field. So being supported by good CDMOs that can manage the new technology and the new types of drugs is a very useful thing. And then increasing that capacity it brings more and more into it. So I think we're in a very virtuous cycle. I don't think it's not a zero-sum game. This is about building capacity, getting drugs to clinic, having those drugs be clinically validated, which drives more capital, drives more new innovative drug development programs. We really are just at the start of what, I strongly believe this field is going to be the biggest field in therapeutics. So it's a very virtuous cycle, and you can see makes a lot of sense why all the blue chip private equity groups are now making big bets in this area as well.
We've seen some blurring of the lines between bioprocess vendors or traditional bioprocess vendors and CDMOs, with big companies investing in one or the other, thus having both the supply chain within them and the manufacturing output as well. If a manufacturer has direct access to the tools, equipment, and consumables needed to make drugs, is this not a massive advantage over the competition, especially when going back to some of those supply chain issues we spoke of earlier? I don't know, Georgia, if you have any thoughts on that.
I'll leave that up to John to answer.
Oh, I undoubtedly. I mean, yeah, vertical integration of the supply chain and across all stages of the process is incredibly effective. I mean, there's a ton of efficiencies that we can generate based on that, and especially when we get down to what I see. If I'm predicting 2022, 2023, what we're going to see is the COVID pandemic kind of curtain that's been hiding the rest of the industry. When that gets pulled aside, we're going to see a revolution in genomic medicine, which has very different requirements, heavily dependent on single-use consumables, and is going to be very much changed. And that's where having the control of the entire process, what we call idea to injection, becomes very, very useful. And again, supporting a platform technology or becomes much more attainable if you can control all aspects of that platform and then provide them to someone.
So this is beyond a one-stop shop, as we were saying before. This is a one-stop shop plus all the raw materials, all the consumables.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I would say too, I think there's a really interesting fluidity happening between with the drug developers, between taking technology internal and using external contract services as well, and seeing programs kind of go back and forth as they're developed. And I think, again, it speaks to this different technology, these cell-free continuous flow processes where at some stage they need support. At some stage you're like, hey, this is something we could do internally as well. And so I think we'll continue to see that, and we'll continue to see just totally different paradigms in this field.
Well, I think that's pretty much covered the predictions for the next couple of years, all things considered. So let's shift gears. Just looking at the clock, I would like to talk about what's obviously a very important topic here. The world has just had its eyes on Glasgow, Scotland for the COP26 meeting. So it feels de rigueur to ask you all about sustainability efforts in biopharma before we end. John, James, Georgia, do any of you have any examples of how your companies specifically are looking to reduce their environmental impacts and attain sustainability goals?
In terms of us, there's obviously well, for one thing, we were able to cut down on business travel and still be successful in terms of achieving our goals. And then joining a large organization that has local sales support should allow us to continue to de-emphasize business travel, and that can have a serious impact on reaching climate goals. In terms of our manufacturing, because we're making a standard product, getting rid of waste in that process, as well as, again, in the consumable side, trying to minimize the complexity of the the products, but single use does mean disposable. Recycling is possible, but not necessarily fully implemented in many places, but also to look for ways of handling the amount of plastic waste that is coming out of the single use industry is something that's going to need continued focus, obviously.
Yeah, and I would just add just a couple of points here, but a smaller point with the single use, sometimes that is the more sustainable approach, whereby cleaning in place and other methods can be very, very wasteful. And so we've done some studies to demonstrate that with some of our equipment. But I would say too, I think the importance of this industry in general, 2020 demonstrated that when health is a major issue, other problems like climate change and the like are not as at the forefront as they need to be. And so by providing good solutions for health so citizens can continue to innovate and not be in a state of pandemic, panic, what have you, is very valuable. And just that standard living, that impact on humankind so we can solve these big problems is critical. And it's great to see the role that our industry has played in impacting society in the last couple of years.
And also, I mean, things like continuous processing, obviously reduce footprint, reduce energy and raw material requirements. So those types of trends, if continued, will obviously reduce the overall footprint of the farm.
And I suppose also going back to the in-country manufacturing as well, would cut down on travel, on packaging, on logistics as well. So there are steps being made by the sounds of it within our industry, much like others. Probably still a lot more to do, but I think that's for the world generally. On that note, we have been defeated again by time, but I'd like to thank my guests, John Harmer, James Taylor, and Georgia Sloboda. Thank you all for watching, and say that we will be back to talk about the day's hot topics early next year. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.